And Clarence goes, Henry who? They got in their Lincoln and left. Clarence said when he went home, his Model A was still back there. So he says, I assume when it got dark, he went back to Dearborn and the deal was over. But there was stuff like that Clarence told me every day, and I can't remember them anymore. But I mean, just have stories of that kind of behavior, and I don't know, I get a bang out of it. And being that.
See, I've got one more on my list here, and says you really liked your Grandpa Rendell and that he had sheep.
Well, Grandpa fed lambs, and there ain't too many guys. He was 45 when I was born, he was 90 when I died. When he died, and so I had a grandpa for 45 years. And we lived out there before we moved to town, and went a lot of places and did a lot of stuff with him. And when we're talking about lambs, they had a flock of ewes that had lambs, but there was only about 35 of them. And I'm talking 2 rail cars, double-decked, from Wyoming, would either come into Milan. The railroads had to have stockyards back when they were moving a lot of livestock, because 24 hours is all an animal can be on a rail car without eating or drinking. And the railroads got to unload them and leave them on the ground for that time, same time that they were on the rail. And so we had got, there wasn't a stockyards in Cone, which was a railroad, there was a railroad crossing there, but they had a depot there and an elevator and a grocery store. And so we backed right up to the rail cars there to unload them. But most of the time they ended up in Milan. How come that one time they didn't Cone, I don't know. But we're looking at over 1,000 lambs every year. And when they got them, would be after the combining was done, and back then all the fields were fenced that you could run livestock in them. So they'd run them on the wheat stubble, and if wheat come out of the combiner got spilled, that sprout start coming up, and most generally they had the wheat field seeded to clover, and then they'd run them in oat stubble, and then when corn got pollinated, we'd run them in cornfields. And if you want to have fun, try and get 1,000 lambs out of a cornfield. Because they won't cross, they'll follow the road clear to the end, and when you get them on the end, you got to get them out of there. And as a kid, did a lot of that. Neighbors helped one another. Nobody in the neighborhood fed lambs like Grandpa did. And shearing them was another story. It would be from 3 to 5 guys there for more than a week to 10 days shearing sheep. And the story, the wool was worth more than the lamb was because of the war and the amount of wool that went into clothing back in that time frame. I can't give you no idea of what kind of price we're looking at. It was just part of life. And then in the spring, Cleveland, for some reason, I think it comes out that the Jewish people have some sacrifice or something with lamb. And they would come with semis from Cleveland and pick up the lambs at the farm. There was only once that I remember of ever taking them back to Milan and loading them in rail cars in the spring before use. The snow was gone and it wasn't mud. That you'd take them back, and what Grandpa did was, some lambs just never did well, and so he gave the grandkids lambs. All of them had. When we moved to town in '44, I had 7 head of lambs at that time, and I was about 44. What's that make me, 8 or 9 years old? And I always laughed. I had to sell them then. If we hadn't moved to town, or we'd have rented a barn or something, if I'd ended up with a bunch of sheep instead of milking cows, it always made me laugh, whether, what would have happened, but it didn't, so, but, and it's funny, I still have the opportunity, like at a fair or something, I walk down through the sheep barn and you can look at them sheep and if they want to mess around and if they don't, whoever owns them never spent much time with them, is the bottom line. Sheep like attention. It's just part of life. So.
He doesn't know that about them.
Huh?
That they're kind of attention hungry.
Can't understand.
Oh, sorry. The sheep are kind of attention hungry. I wasn't aware of that.
Well, it's surprising. Most animals are. I don't know. I can tell you right now, there's a cow over here to Michigan State. When I started there, she was a heifer about like that. And she was red and white, and that's what we were breeding, red and white cows. And I started paying attention, and she grew up, and enough things happened, and when she freshened, I was like, there, she was in a stall, and I'm walking down through there, and sticking her head out there, and that finally registered in my head, and from a small animal about like that, and I think she's had her 2nd or 3rd calf now, and when she sees me, you can see it in her face, she knows me. Is smiling. It was Tuesday or Wednesday morning, she had just come out of the parlor, and I hadn't taken them back to where they came from. And she came right up and did that with her head on me. And then you put your arm around their head and start talking to them. And I think, God, she looks like she's getting kind of thin. I was going to ask Carolyn how much milk she was giving. Well, then she hasn't been fresh that long. When she was getting ready to dry her up, Carolyn said something. I says, well, we got to get her dry. She goes like that. Well, I said, how much milk she giving? She's giving 90 pounds yet, and she's milked over 300 days. And I'm like, well, so how much milk she gave when she freshened, I don't know that part of the story. And the milk tester was just there the other day. I should have asked her, but she needs more to eat. There ain't no question about it. And so, because right now the cows that are milking are averaging 100 pounds of milk a day. And what are you gonna say? I mean, that's a, and I mean, it's easy for me to You go in there, and if you got cows that's got fat like that on their back, and cows that their ribs are sticking out, it's very plain who's giving the milk. So what, I don't know. I know I think different than the average person.
Well, that exhausts my list, so if you can go ahead and.
You wanna take a break before we go on?
No, all right.
No. So what do you know about when your parents got married and what that was like for them?
Well, the church in Cone and the one in Ray, Michigan had the same preacher. Why they got married in Ray, I never heard that part of the story. But between the two of them, they had $1 in change, and they gave that whole $1 to the preacher that night. When they left the church, they didn't have a penny to their name. And when you think about, I guess the way to illustrate, my mom was, she graduated in 31, got married in 32, and started having kids in 33 to 37. Dad never finished high school. Dundee School burnt when he was in high school, and they were having classes in the top of the stores downtown. He didn't want no part of it, so that I can't. So the day they got married, how they selected who came to the wedding and that, I don't know that part of the story, but there was farmers that had tenant houses and hired men, and some of them got lost to the fact that they didn't have money to pay them, and this one neighbor there, Louis Price, lived over on Milwaukee Road. How him and Dad knew one another, I don't know if it was from church or what, but he told them before they left the church if they wanted to spend the night in the tenant house, they were welcome. And they did. And so Dad told me that when I was a kid, so Louis Price's name had always meant something, that he reached out to my folks when they got married and didn't have anything, you know what I mean, for a place for a honeymoon. And I crossed paths with Louis quite a few times in my life, so I don't know how you say, I mean, to me, you appreciated. Louis lost his wife, I have no idea, I never knew her, and he had a boy that was about my age that went to Dundee, and I knew him from a kid, so it's whatever you want to make it. I can't I don't care who you are, you think you have a tough time in life, but you look back at what they started with. And
So where did they live after that night?
My brother Leland got married. I don't know the dates, but they had to have been awful close, because Leland and Catherine, oldest kid, and my oldest sister, they're just months apart, so they had to have been close. And they all were living up to Grandma and Grandpa's. There was 3 bedrooms upstairs, and Leland and Catherine lived in one, and my and Dad lived in one, and all the rest of the girls was in the other bedroom. I can't imagine what kind of, when you start trying to figure out how they had enough, to eat, when you figure, well, the rest of the kids, well, yeah. Lucille's 7 years older than I am, so what would that made her born in 28 or 29? So she would have been a little kid in that, and Margaret's a couple years older. So I don't know, I can't imagine. I mean, that'd take a pretty big table for every meal. And when you, of course, Grandma had chickens, and they butchered hogs. And that, back to the sheep deal, they pushed them pretty hard because a lamb doesn't have the ability like cattle or hogs. A lamb will overeat and die from overeating. And so you gotta regulate the feed quite, I don't know what the right word is there accurately.
More stringently than you would other animals.
Because, and you gotta have enough room for them all to eat at the same time. And if you, and that was one of the first things they did every morning when they got in the barn. They walked around and see if there was any dead lambs. Because if a lamb dies and it's still warm, you can butcher it out and eat it. And so I ate all the lamb I wanted when I was a kid. I don't care about it anymore. And Grandma had, you know, chickens and eggs and that, and they always had a big garden. And so, you know, you put the whole thing together, but to come up with how many lambs they would lose in a winter, I don't know. They were piled pretty deep out behind the barn, I know that. I wouldn't doubt that you would have 25 or 30. And the pelt was worth, if it was cold where you wasn't going to butcher it, you just skinned them out and they threw them on a pile. Back then they could get away with that. I'm kind of surprised they didn't feed them to the hogs, because hogs are real cannibal. There ain't no nice way of saying that.
So what house do you remember living in first?
Well, they rented this farm across the road down. They called it Pete's Farm. Pete Hanlon lost it. Everybody on the road out there to Grandpa's lost their farm in the Depression except Early's and Grandpa. Everybody else lost their farms. And what the whole story is, and it depends on who's telling the story. Right across the road from him, I can't remember his first name, his last name was Miller. They were sure they were going to lose theirs, so they just walked away. And in '46, when they got a new car, Grandpa did, I was out there, and the Miller family went up to Saline and rented a farm. Well, it's from Albert Heidinger's brother, and was a tenant farmer until they died. And evidently Grandma and Grandpa liked the people or something that, you know, to grow up there. And Grandpa maintained that, he says, I owed a lot more money than they did, and I wasn't going to give up, he said, you know, I was going to stay there and fight or whatever, and they just, because they owed the money. And well, then Grandpa did tell me, the fall before we moved on Hartel Road, we got that farm bought on Hartel Road 2 years before we moved up there. And so, because we were on felt camps and we had to stay 5 years, I had a 5-year contract when we started there. And so we're taking the tractor and chopper and wagons up to Charlotte fill the silo. There was a silo on the barn. It wasn't a very big one. And how Grandpa come with Dad that day, I don't know. I was still milking, and Dad took off with a tractor and chopper at daylight. And Grandpa hung around and rode with me. So we go through Stockbridge, and we get in Stockbridge, and the nicest house in Stockbridge, Grandpa goes, I can't remember the people's last name. He said, there's where the woman lived that had the mortgage on the other farm down there where we had lived. They call it the other place. I didn't have any money, and I knew I couldn't pay for it, so I come up to sign it back to her. And she wouldn't accept it. She said that if anybody's gonna get any money, you're gonna get it, and you'll pay me. And he said within 18 months he went to her funeral. But what he did after he told her that, he had went to the Federal Land Bank down to Blissfield different times to see if he could get any money. And he went down and they said, well, you can sign up, you know. And he said they had come through with money and he had paid her off not very long before she passed away. And he said, you know, you just got to thank the Lord that he put all that stuff together for that to happen. And if he hadn't have come with Dad that day and went, you know, I would have never heard them stories or what actually happened, you know.
So the other place is different than Pete's place?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where Lori lives now.
Is Pete's place?
No,
Is the other place?
the other place. After some people down by Whitaker picked up a lot of them farms, the banks like in Wyland had the notes on them. And what would happen is somebody that had money would come in and buy them notes, and then the bank wasn't tied to it anymore, the individual. Well, them individuals it was a cheap way to get a farm is the best way to answer it. Because Grandpa had taken me down, the people owned a sawmill down by Whitaker, and we went down there and got some stuff, and so Grandpa was telling me the story of how that worked. They rented the farm from this guy down there to Whitaker, or Willis, and it was one of them towns. They're not very big down there, about it. And I don't know, we lived in that house till I was 4 or 5, because when we moved down to the other place, that was when I started in the kindergarten. I'd have been 5. Because when we first moved down to the other place, school was still going on, and Marilyn was going over to the school there on the county line, and what's the name of that road from the farm that went down east there from the bridge?
Welch.
Welch Road. See, you can find them. I can't find them anymore. Maryland, and that's where Ma graduated from the 8th grade. All of them. Whatever. It's a house now, but it's still there, so you have to smile at it, how time goes.
And what's your earliest memory? Do you think it's getting the acid in your eyes?
Probably.
So what happened there?
Well, back in that time frame, it wasn't unreasonable. I don't know if they actually had a fenced-in chicken yard at that time or not, but an old hen would find a place that she thought was hidden, lay a bunch of eggs, and then set on them and hatch them. And there was a couple old hens running around the yard there with baby chicks, and Joyce and I thought, geez, they need something to drink, and so we found a pan, and there was some jars on the back porch there, and we thought it was water, and we pour in there, and I get it splashed in my eye, and I start screaming and hollering, and they come out of the house, and, "What'd you do to him?" "He got some water in his eye." "Well, where'd you get it?" "It was there on the porch." "Well, that ain't water, that's acid. Leland had it for the bees." And they got me in the house, and they started the pump jack, and Ma and Dave held me under the faucet, and they claim if they hadn't have done it when they did, I would have lost that eye. And then they took us to Milan, and I'll never forget that doctor's office they took me in. The table, I don't know what a table in a doctor's office is, 6 foot long. It was solid people holding me down. I was screaming and hollering so bad that it was unreal. And then I got thinking about it afterwards, and I don't know. That's the first time I remember Uncle Willis and Aunt Norrie, that was Grandpa's sister. He was a water commissioner in Milan. They come out there to see me, and she brought me some toy, and I can't remember what it was really, but that's, you know, the first of that kind of stuff that.
Probably 3 or 4 would have been how old you were.
Well, Joyce was walking in that, and what she, 12, 15 months younger than me, so. I don't know.
So when you moved down to the other place, did it have running water and?
That was a house that was used for immigrant workers. There was no electricity in it, there was no water in it, there was no basement under it. And, well, I guess it would be interesting if we figured back to when Grandpa got that got the loan from the Federal Land Bank and paid it off, how they decided that there was an outfit in Petersburg that would move houses, and they come up and raised the house up, and then they dug out under the house with a slip scraper, which is something about this wide and this long with handles on it, and 2 guys hang onto the handles, and they originally used them on horses, but they were using a tractor to do it. And I still remember the fact that Grandpa always had problems turning around and that. So he's driving the tractor and Dad's running the scraper. And they'd pull it out, and then Grandpa'd back up there by the edge of the house, and they'd get the scraper reset. And somebody come along and said, well, why don't you hook it on the front of the tractor, then you're watching what's going on. You don't have to turn around, and you can back up and you'll do the same thing. Well, after 2 or 3 times, the tractor got away from Grandpa, and they had hand brakes on them Wallace Chalmers, and they had enough dug out. The top of the radiator, about that much, got smashed on the beam on the house. Never leaked, but I always laughed. I remember that taking place in the deal. They got it dug out and put a wall under the house, and Du Bois was a preacher in Britain where they went to church, and he laid fieldstone, and they laid that wall out of fieldstone. And it looks as good today as when that was done around 1940 or 41. You know, it's kind of amazing. The house never had water in it. The well was a dug well. It was I don't know how deep it was. We run water to the barn for the sheep, drank it. They didn't want people to drink it. We washed the clothes in it. There was a pump jack there, and we'd run a hose from that into the house on Sunday night, fill the wash machine, so Monday morning Ma could wash clothes. Probably the tank, the cook stove we had a jacket on the end for water. Probably they filled that and then took the hot water out of that and put in the washing machine. I remember the hose and that kind of stuff. But they did hook up a drain for the house. In the corner of the kitchen had a funnel that stood about that high, and if you had dishwasher dish water or whatever, you poured it in that and it went out in the ditch. So that was as modern as you're gonna get.
So was it the church in Britain was how you guys started going to Gull Lake?
Yeah,
And it was that church that your dad drove the bus for?
no,
No.
he drove the bus for the Baptist church in Milan.
Oh, okay. And that was later on, or?
Yeah, after we moved to town.
Okay.
The bus for Britain, gas got rationed and it was a bugger to end up with enough gas to get your farming done, really. I remember being up to Grandpa's when the gas man came and trying to get, you had to have, I don't remember it, sticks, and I come across some auction sale. I think each coupon was 5 gallons of gas. And, you know, if he left 50 gallons, you gotta come up with 10 stamps, any different than stopping in a gas station and getting stuff. I don't, and so the church in Britain was people that came from the Cone and Ray Church. They were some type of a Methodist church back then, and they were pretty strict on behavior of people, and they changed to what the Methodists are now, were a lot more liberal. And this, like Grandpa and the Hoovers and the monks and the Birds are the ones I think of right now, didn't want to stay with that liberal thinking. And so they found this church in Britain that wasn't being used anymore. And I was evidently young enough, I never got told anything about finance and how they got it and made what they did out of it. And they came up with this